Hey guys, do you like my videos? Yes, that's why you're watching? Cool, then you should join my Discord server. It's got channels and people. Anyways, I really like the community on my Discord server. It's cool and fun and you should join it. Anyways, thanks, enjoy the video. Europe is a proud region. They wear the regional loyalty on their sleeves at esports events, and have given us some of the most memorable crowds in Overwatch history. Need convincing? Check out this clip from Overwatch World Cup 2018, where one of the qualifying rounds was hosted in France.
Quoi qu'il arrive pour le deuxième point, mais ils peuvent encore passer. Oh, le headshot qui fait toute la différence. Et c'est fait. Le double kill, le triple kill. L'équipe de France remporte son groupe à domicile. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, c'est la blade.
Needless to say, a lot of Europeans love their esports, so it was a little sad that there was only one Europe-based team in Overwatch League in Season 1. Of course, the London Spitfire would go on to win the whole thing, so they can't complain too much, but it was with an all-Korean roster. Not that this doesn't discount their achievements, of course it doesn't, but you can't justify a claim that Europe is the best region in Overwatch with that in mind. At the start of Season 1, there was one team with exclusively European players. This was the Florida Mayhem, and their season was an absolute mess. They were relying exclusively on 6 players, and when that didn't work, they scrambled to make new plans, dealt with tons of internal issues, and by the halfway point, Florida had already begun to transition to the all-Korean team that we know today. So in Season 1, we had one European-based team that won, but with Korean players, and one team with European players that failed miserably to have any sort of success. European players were scattered throughout the league, of course, but it was mostly dominated by Korea. The Spitfire were a good team for the region to root for, but a lot of fans wanted a team that they could really get behind. And in Season 2, that team would emerge. A team that promised these fans glory to their region, putting the hopes of an entire continent on their shoulders. This is the story of the Paris Eternal. The Paris Eternal were the only Europe-based expansion team going into Season 2, and they had a lot of work to do if they wanted to compete with the reigning champs. This team was owned by Drew McCourt, owner of the newly created DM Esports. While esports was a new project for McCourt, he was very familiar with his audience. See, he also owns a European football team, Olympique de Marseille, a French team with a long history in the highest tiers of European football. Olympique de Marseille has been around since the 1920s and has won the French Championship, or Ligue 1, 10 times. They've been the runner-up 12 more times. This has made them the most historically successful European football team in France. So, as the owner of a team as successful as this, McCourt knows how passionate a French audience can be, and he saw a huge, untapped market in Overwatch esports, if he played his cards right. So let's start by talking about the coaching staff. The head coach of the Eternal would be Damon, who is coming off of a successful first year as an assistant coach for the LA Valiant. He's had a ton of experience with some of the players he'd end up working with as a former head coach of Rogue, the French Overwatch team that dominated in the earliest days of European Overwatch. And he wouldn't be leading by himself. The first coach to be announced to the team was Fefe. Fefe was making his Overwatch League debut with the Eternal, but he had a ton of experience as the coach for Eagle Gaming, who were one of the most dominant teams in Contenders Europe prior to this season. Not to mention that they were nearly all French, making it a perfect fit for Team Paris. Next was Seita, another Overwatch League debut joining from Team Giganti. Giganti is a team that has been around since the beginning of competitive Overwatch, and they're a lot like the European Runaway in that they've had their roster nearly dismantled by Overwatch League teams multiple times and still managed to stay on top of the Tier 2 European scene. And the final coach surprised a lot of people in Kai. Now, Kai has gotten memed a lot for his dramas in the Dallas Fuel, and I'm not saying that some of that isn't deserved, but Kai is one of the most experienced coaches in all of Overwatch, and any player who has worked with him directly has spoken very highly of him. Kai would bring a veteran perspective to this coaching staff, and the same philosophy went into choosing their players. The veterans in this case, of course, were Soon and Shadowburn, two of the most recognizable names in European Overwatch. Soon enjoyed a ton of success in Season 1 as a hitscan ace of the LA Valiant, but Shadowburn wasn't quite as lucky. He joined the Philly Fusion in Season 1, showing flashes of that 2016 Genji that we all know and love, but was ultimately outshone and replaced by EQO later in the season. The Eternal was his big second chance at the big league. Joining these two were a whole host of Overwatch League rookies, and if you haven't figured it out, Paris' strategy was to build a European super team. A team based in Europe, made of only European players. A team that the entire region could rally behind. In all, players from France, the UK, Russia, Poland, Iceland, Finland, and Portugal were represented. Joining Fefe from Eagle Gaming was DPS Nico and off-support Hip. Now, Hip's first major achievements in competitive Overwatch came with Eagle Gaming, but Nico is special as one of the members of the original dominant rogue team that included Soon, AKM, and Unko in its prime, so it's always great to see another member of that team make Overwatch League. The final French edition was main tank Benbest, joining from Young and Beautiful, who, to be honest, are a pretty bad European contenders team. They're the kind of team that always wins trials but loses contenders. Benbest was more likely added on from his work as the main tank of Team France in the Overwatch World Cup earlier that year. From the UK, we have Cruz, joining from the successful NA contenders team Toronto Esports, and someone who really impressed as a key part of Team UK's semi-final run in the Overwatch World Cup. From Poland, we had Danye, Flex DPS player. Now Danye was one of the most under-the-radar pickups here. He didn't have much of a resume to go off of as a member of the bottom-feeding Copenhagen Flames, but he was often a standout player when Poland would go to the Overwatch World Cup. Starting to see a pattern? From Iceland, we had Finzi. Now Finzi is the only other person on the team who technically has Overwatch League experience as a member of the LA Valiant. However, when you're backing up space on off-tank, there isn't much you can do. Finzi almost never saw stage time, but had spent a lot of time learning under some of the best in the world, and this was his opportunity to show that he could stand with the best. From Finland, we have LH Cloudy, a main tank from Giganti. Needless to say, one of the hottest European main tank pickups this offseason. He briefly joined Mayhem Academy, where it was revealed that they were planning to call him up until he took the offer from Paris. Did he make the right decision? And finally, from Portugal, it was Gray. Gray had played for Cloud9 EU back in the day, but more recently was a part of the mess that was GGEA, which, as we've learned, was more due to the management than the players themselves, so we can't blame Gray too much for that. Paris was one of the most popular expansion teams going into Season 2. European or not, everyone loved seeing a team that went against the Korean rush, trying to succeed off of the merits of a different region. Not to mention that the meta seemed to favor them. Europe loves their tanks. Even before GOATS, their contenders players were running triple and quadruple tank compositions more often than anyone else. Therefore, going into a GOATS meta, Paris were a team to watch. However, there was still a lot of uncertainty. Paris was going in with a lot of rookies, many of which hadn't had a lot of success at the contenders level. Because of this, most experts rated Paris in the bottom half of their power rankings as the season got underway. And Paris' season started off with a bang, with a battle for Europe against the London Spitfire. To start off the season, Paris' starting lineup included Benbest, Finzi, Soon, Nico, Hip, and Cruz. And they looked good. Paris had been hyped up as a GOATS beast for months now, and they proved themselves against a Spitfire team that was struggling to find their footing. Paris would take down the defending champions and would do the same shortly after to another highly rated team in the LA Gladiators. The Eternal were off to a 2-0 start, and optimism could not possibly be higher. It was at this time that Paris was often cited as one of, if not the, best GOATS team in the world. Special consideration has to be given to Cruz, who at this point was considered to be one of the best main supports in the world due to his incredible game sense and leadership. Unfortunately, the Eternal would fall back to earth pretty quickly. Games against San Francisco and Vancouver were definitely tough, but they really should have won against the Reign. Paris' support line was pretty good, but their tanks, of all things, seemed to be the weakest part. Benbest would get out-dueled by opposing Reinhardts more often than not, and Soon has always thrived in a mechanical setting, playing heroes like Tracer and Widowmaker, but Zarya requires a bit more on the game sense side, with bubble management and who to bubble when, which can be sneakily difficult. Look, everyone in the Overwatch League playing Zarya can track really good. Like, they're all really good at that. So what separates a good Zarya from a great Zarya is the game sense that comes with the bubble management. And he just couldn't get the hang of it at the level that he needed to be at. They even tried putting Shadowburn on Zarya a little bit, but he didn't have much luck either. To really succeed in this meta, you need a star Zarya player. Paris didn't have that, and they never really would get it. As the stage started coming to a close, Paris found themselves at 3-3 overall, and a game against the Philadelphia Fusion would decide whether or not they would move on to the stage playoffs. Now, the Fusion were a team with their own set of struggles, and this really was a hard-fought back-and-forth match. But in the end, it was the Fusion who would end up on top with a 2-1 score. Paris would fall to 3-4 and just barely miss out on the playoffs. As Stage 2 got underway, the Paris Eternal came out with a very different look. To start off, head coach Damon stepped down from the team in order to take an assistant coaching job with the Dallas Fuel. Fefe took the head coaching role in his stead. As far as the roster goes, LH Cloudy came in on main tank over Benbest, Shadowburn started getting some time over Nico, and Gray took the flex support role from Hip. We even saw Danye come in for some select maps like Paris. The Eternal obviously weren't happy with the slump they were in, losing 4 of their last 5 games, and after some reconsideration of their roster, thought injecting some new players and strategies would help. Yeah, while teams like Chengdu and Shanghai would get a lot of the spotlight from fans for almost never playing a traditional GOATS comp, Paris started playing DPS comps as well. It was more like 40-50% of the time, so it didn't get as much attention. Did it work? Well, not really. Positives first, while Hip wasn't necessarily bad, he wasn't the explosive kind of player that you usually want in the flex support position. Gray, however, had some pretty impressive moments.
Or a bit of a flank. So they're just poking going on the roof there.
I'm trying to see where the weaknesses are. That's a great play on a grenade. Great.
It's going to allow the Hunters to get up to about 50%. Oh, really? That is nuts. I can see
that triple DPS composition. So fear comes for both these teams, but that is a huge kill of Gray on the top.
Up front from Paris, still looking good. Gray with the switch.
Oh, Gray with the clutch.
But that's about all I can say. Shadowburn and LH Cloudy were fine. I imagine Paris thought Cloudy was more flexible, which is why they put him in for more DPS comps, and Shadowburn was wanted for his veteran leadership, maybe? But neither of them ended up being the dynamic players that they needed. Paris' only wins this stage would come against Guangzhou and Florida, which should tell you all that you need to know. Paris was in trouble. Even after making wholesale changes to their starting lineup and incorporating strategies that fit their players better, they were still struggling to defeat teams that weren't the lowest of the low. With Stage 3 came, once again, all sorts of changes for Paris. Okay, so luckily support stayed the same this time, but now Nico and Danye are in to start at DPS, which is okay, and Benbest was back in for LH Cloudy. We also saw them shift strategies again, going back to mostly a mixture of GOATs and Sombra GOATs except for very specific points. Listen, Paris, it's Stage 3 now. The season is halfway over, I know you've been struggling, but at some point you just gotta find a 6 and stick with it. I've never been a fan of teams changing their starting lineups back and forth like Paris has done, because every time you do that you have to rebuild synergy with this new lineup. It doesn't matter how well they do in practice, a team needs stage time together in Overwatch League to really get comfortable with each other. Every stage, Paris essentially reset, starting over while other teams had been building up this synergy for months. Needless to say, it didn't end up working much better than anything else. Despite having one of the easiest stages possible, Paris would still end up going 3-4, missing out on the playoffs once again. If the Eternal were going to finish in the top 12 to make the postseason, they would need a hell of a final stage. And since Rollock put Orisa in the meta, LH Cloudy swapped out to replace Benbest once again, as well as Stoon and Shadowburn on the DPS roles. I can kinda see the pattern at this point. This seemed to be their ideal DPS lineup, and their Stage 3 lineup was GOATs, But I'm not going to beat around the bush anymore here. The Eternal never got the incredible stage that they needed. Their veteran DPS duo would pop off sometimes, but so would the other team, and they would do it much more often. Cruz and Gray, who were by far the best part of the Eternal to start the season, had cooled off a ton by the end, and weren't the carries that they needed either. Finzy and Cloudy were tough as always, but it was tough for tanks to pop off in this meta. Paris would go 3-4 once again, finishing with a record of 11-17. It netted them 14th place overall, not enough to make the playoffs. With that, Paris' season came to an end. Disappointment. That's all I can say when I think back on the season of the Paris Eternal. This team had so much hype and excitement going in, marketing themselves to be the European super team, which was really cool. But once the season actually began, Paris struggled to find their identity beyond that. It's possible that the head coaching change after Stage 1 caught them off guard, as the team never seemed sure of themselves afterwards. Who is your main tank? Who are your DPS? What comps were they actually good at? These are all questions that Paris ultimately failed to answer, coming up with strategy after strategy and lineup after lineup, but always playing catch-up to better teams. This was the second chance that an all-European squad had at Overwatch League, and just like the mayhem before them, the Eternal are moving to a mixed roster for the future. Is this the right decision? Probably. But I'm not sure if we'll ever see a fully European roster on the Overwatch League stage again. And that does make me a little sad. That's why my final grade for the Paris Eternal in Season 2 of the Overwatch League is a D+. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed looking back on the Paris Eternal season as much as I did. What do you think the Eternal could have done to increase their chances of success? Let me know in the comments. As always, like this video if you liked it, and subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss a single episode of SiR. Speaking of that, let's see who our 5th team will be. Toronto. Now, these guys are actually really interesting. I've been looking forward to talking about them. Until then, though, don't get tilted.